Hello, my friends, Evolutionary Energy Arts family.
Welcome back.
So, guys, I just saw this. This was curious. And this is out of the Sun Sentinel. The question is, are we getting invaded? U.S. boats face Russian aggression near Alaska.
Whoa.
Yeah, if you guys have been following this channel for a long period of time, then you would know, that I've shared with you the dreams and visions I've had that have been recurring ever since I was 19 years old back in 1984, in which I've seen exactly that scenario.
Yeah, I feel it's going to happen.
Yeah, and we don't want it to happen. We want there to be a peaceful timeline. But at the same time, when you have these things that come up time and time and time again, I take it as a possible timeline, and perhaps a warning from my guides to, be alert and aware. And here we see the crew of the Bristol Leader was laying out its long cod-catching line well within U.S. fishing territory in the Bering Sea when a voice crackled over the VHF radio and began issuing commands. The ship was in danger, it said, needed to move. The warnings, coming in a mixture of Russian and accented English from a plane buzzing overhead, grew more specific and more urgent. There was a submarine nearby, the voice said. Missiles were being fired. Leave the area. Other U.S. fishing vessels that were scattered over 100 miles of open sea were getting similar messages. Captain Steve Elliott stood dumbfounded on the trawler Vesteralen as 3 Russian warships came barreling through, barking orders of their own. On the ship Blue North, commands from a Russian plane led by Captain David Anderson to contact the U.S. Coast Guard wondered how to protect his crew of 27. It was frightening to say the least, Anderson said. The Coast Guard's response was, just do what they say. The Russian military operations in August inside the U.S. economic zone off the coast of Alaska were the latest in a series of escalated encounters across the North Pacific and the Arctic, where the retreat of polar ice continues to draw new commercial and military traffic. This year, the Russian military has driven a new nuclear-powered icebreakers straight up to the North Pole, dropping paratroopers into a high Arctic archipelago to perform a mock battle, and repeatedly flown bombers to the edge of U.S. airspace. As seas warmed by climate change, quote-unquote, now new opportunities for oil exploration and trade routes, the U.S. Coast Guard now finds itself monitoring a range of new activity. Cruise ships promising a voyage through waters few have ever seen, research vessels trying to understand the changing landscape, tankers carrying new gas riches, and shipping vessels testing new passageways that sailors of centuries of past could only dream about. Russia's operations in the Arctic have met a growing military presence at America's northern door. Rear Admiral Matthew T. Bell, Jr., the commander of the Coast Guard district that oversees Alaska, said it was not a surprise to see Russian forces operating in the Bering Sea over summer, but the surprise was how aggressive they got on our side of the maritime boundary line. In the air, U.S. jets in Alaska typically scramble to intercept about a half dozen approaching Russian aircraft a year, outliers on the long-range nuclear bomber patrols that Russia resumed in 2007, but this year that number rose to 14, on a pace to set a record since the Cold War era. In the most recent case, last month, the United States responded to the approach of 2 Russian bombers and 2 Russian fighters that came within 30 nautical miles of Alaskan shores. Russians have refurbished and restored dozens of military posts in the Arctic region, including on Wrangel Island, some 300 miles from the coast of Alaska, and have laid plans for controlling emerging navigation routes that would bring traffic through the Bering Strait between Alaska and Russia. This summer, Russia's military operated in the Bering Sea, home to America's largest fishery, where boats haul up pots crawling with red king crab, and trawlers dump nets filled with 200 tons of pollock onto their decks. And obviously with the food situation the way it is and building, besides the natural resources up there, that's another reason for them to put so much effort into it. And Russia really is far ahead of everybody else in controlling the Arctic area.
Oh, yeah, and they have been for quite some time.
Yeah, it's interesting to just see like the amount of icebreakers we have compared to them. We don't really have hardly any. And the dogs might start barking as the UPS guy comes now. The area is a U.S. pathway to the Arctic waters where extraction companies have worked for years to capture the billions of dollars of oil and gas resources trapped under the sea floor. U.S. territorial waters extend 12 nautical miles from the nation's shores, but commercial vessels operate even farther within the U.S. exclusive economic zone, a territory stretching some 200 miles offshore in which the country can harvest fish or natural resources without foreign competition, but cannot prohibit the passage of international vessels. Russian military leaders have touted the exercises in the Bering Sea as unlike any they had done before in the region. They said the goal of the effort was to prepare forces to secure economic development in the Arctic region, and U.S. officials have acknowledged that the Russians have a right to transit the waters. Disputes over activities in the exclusive economic zones around the world are not unusual, especially in the lucrative Arctic region, where several nations have contested the extent of their rights to dominate maritime economic activities. Before a 1990 boundary agreement, the issue was especially contentious in the Bering Sea, which narrows to just 55 miles between the coasts of Alaska and Russia in the Bering Strait. In August, exercises occurred well south of the narrow strait in an area where the sea is hundreds of miles wide. Tim Thomas, a U.S. captain on the fishing vessel Northern Jager, encountered the Russian activities on August 26 when his ship was operating more than 20 nautical miles inside the U.S. economic zone. After a Russian plane directed Thomas to take his boat out of the area, he said he responded that he was within the U.S. zone, not on the Russian side, and that the Russians could not order them to leave. At that point, he said the Russian military ship joined in and issued similar orders. At this point, I'm going. What's going on here? Are we getting invaded? Thomas said in an interview. Thomas said he contacted the Coast Guard, but the officers there, he said, seemed to be unaware of Russian operations. They told him he was responsible for the safety of his crew, but he was reluctant to leave. They were finding some of the best fishing of the season, and the Russians had ordered him not to return to these productive grounds for 9 days. The Russians, who were running a military exercise known as Ocean Shield that involved some 50 warships and 40 aircraft operating throughout the Bering Sea, were adamant, and their warnings grew more intense. U.S. officials have since said that a Russian submarine launched a cruise missile from the Bering Sea that day. As he considered the safety of the 130 people on his boat, he ultimately decided to leave. He estimates that the forced departure cost his company more than $1 million in revenue. Senator Daniel Sullivan, Republican from Alaska, who has pressed for years for a stronger U.S. presence in the Arctic and has warned about increasing Russian activity there, said the fishing boats should not have been forced to leave the U.S. fishing territory. He said he was surprised by the scale of Russia's recent aggressive actions in the Bering Sea, noting that during the same exercise in August, fighter planes from the North American Aerospace Defense Command, or NORAD, scrambled to respond to 3 groups of Russian aircraft that approached Alaska. I think they were testing us, flexing their military muscle, the senator said. Coast Guard officials said Russia had notified the U.S. government that part of its exercise would include a portion of the fishing zone, but federal officials did not alert commercial fishing operators as to the planned exercise. Coast Guard officials said they had been working to make sure further notifications reached the right people. They have also said that U.S. fishing vessels are not required to follow any orders from a foreign entity to depart U.S. fishing grounds. But in a memo last month to those involved in the North Pacific fishing industry that outlined what had transpired in the Bering Sea, the Coast Guard also cautioned that the safety of life at sea should always be paramount in managing the safe navigation of any vessel on the high seas, and that is the responsibility of the mariner with first-hand situational awareness. As Russia has ramped up its presence in the region, U.S. officials have accelerated their own efforts. The Coast Guard has long complained that its lone pair of aging icebreakers are struggling to stay in service, but may now have the opportunity to build 6 new ones. Russia has dozens. This is what we were talking about, and it's amazing when you see, you got to wonder where the U.S. military money really goes. I think a huge portion goes into black ops that we just don't know about. It's either that or it's, $200 nails and $1,000 hammers. Who knows? The United States is also discussing a northern deepwater port, perhaps around Nome. Currently, the nearest strategic port is 1,300 nautical miles away in Anchorage. Alaska already draws a relatively large portion of U.S. military spending, with bases serving the Air Force and Army in and around both Anchorage and Fairbanks. Jets in Alaska scrambled repeatedly this year to intercept Russian aircraft moving toward U.S. airspace. But jets taken off from inland bases can take more than 90 minutes to reach the coast of Alaska, says Major General Scott Clancy, a Canadian officer who's director of operations at NORAD. Clancy said the encounters were professional. In the encounter last month, the 4 Russian aircraft loitered in the area for about 90 minutes, never crossed into U.S. airspace. But Clancy said it was clear the Russians were both testing the capabilities of NORAD and demonstrating their own, increasing the frequency and complexity of their approach. This adversary, this competitor, Russia, has advanced on all fronts, he said. We find ourselves in another era of great power competition. Russia obviously wants to be a competitor at that. And Lieutenant General David Crum, commander of the Multi-Force Alaskan Command and also the 11th Air Force, said that while the Arctic used to provide a natural buffer between the nations of the far north, a new possibility of ice-free passage has changed that. We're at the pivotal point in the timeline of the Arctic, he said at a recent convention of the Alaskan Federation of Natives, many of whose members reside in the remote villages scattered throughout the northern region. Crum said the United States would need to invest in operations, equipment, and training to prepare for the changing environment. Alaska, he said, has historically been viewed as a base from which to project American power elsewhere in the world, but the mission is changing. What we have to do now is to be prepared to fight here and defend here, he said.
That's a lot to keep an eye on.
It is. One thing I always look at is the USNI fleet tracker. And one thing that's been interesting is just the lack of activity that we've seen compared to what we've seen in the past. And I don't know if it's just to do with the election and the fact that, this is, I don't know. Is it something to do with the election or what's going on? Because it's just unusual. As we see, basically, we're just looking at the Nimitz over here in the Indian Ocean off the coast over here of Saudi Arabia and actually around Yemen, and the Ronald Reagan carrier strike group over here off of Japan, and that's it. So usually as we go back and through the times, like it seems like it started somewhere over here in October that things started to apparently de-escalate, which would be a good thing, I guess, but I'm always suspicious of everything. Here you had 2 carrier strike groups. This is back October 19th, and the Nimitz over there. And you could get an idea of the activity. It's been actually down from a point where at one point we had 3 actually off of in the South China Sea. And that was a pretty tense time. So is it just a de-escalation going on? I don't know. It just feels, everything feels a little unusual right now.
It does. It really, really does. It's crazy.
And then, of course, with the fact that we have all the chaos going on right now in the country, from protests to election. Interesting times.
Indeed.
So, guys, thank you so much for your support on Ko-Fi and Patreon. I look forward to your thoughts on what you think is going on with all this. Stay safe, stay prepared, God bless, and namaste.
Namaste.